what I think about when I talk about blockchain citizens is that we noticed specifically around Cardano, but I think also a couple of other platforms. Algorand is quite strong in this. Polkadot is quite strong in that. We see that it attracts not just younger people, but attracts people who is very much aware that everything who's on the internet has a quite high likelihood of being fake or being manipulated or other things. And on a blockchain, because the whole nature of a blockchain is that it costs something, it means that it gets more expensive to do something fake, but it also means that you can verify things through the blockchain and you can have different signatures, digital identifiers, and so on. So what we are seeing is that there's not just on blockchain, but specifically around blockchains and other technology, there's a new sort of consumer class emerging, which actually are willing to pay more if they can understand the footprint they're leaving on Mother Earth when they consume and when they buy.
Welcome to Tech Intersect. I'm your host, Tonya Evans, and my life and work exist at the heart of law, business, and technology. Yeah, I've earned a few fancy titles and degrees over the years, but the bottom line is I'm a writer, speaker, teacher, and lifelong learner, and I'm really excited that you've joined me on this journey. So what is Tech Intersect? Well, it's authentic, empowering conversations with really interesting guests who demystify complex topics to prepare you for the future, because your future is now. And it exists where law, business, and tech intersect. Get ready to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started.
Welcome back to another episode of Tech Intersect. My name is Alicia and I am Tanya's producer. Today I wanted to let you know that we are going to be moving her episodes from Fridays to Mondays. Or the goal of that is so that you can start your week with the latest and best at the intersection of law, business, and tech. And the goal is to prepare you for the future of work, wealth, and creativity. Thanks for tuning in.
In this episode of Tech Intersect, I am really excited to welcome to the show Frederik Gregaard. He is the CEO of the Cardano Foundation, an independent Swiss-based not-for-profit organization tasked with advancing the public digital infrastructure. Cardano is that, while also contributing to the positive advancement of blockchain and distributed ledgers as a world-changing technology. And the Cardano Foundation works to foster adoption through targeted partnerships with various enterprises, international institutions, government agencies, environmental NGOs, which is extremely important, and leading universities. You know, that is near and dear to my heart as a tenured professor. Frederik is a leader in fintech and blockchain, really a vanguard. As I've gotten to know a bit about his background and his work, I'm truly honored that we're going to have this conversation today. He has a background in banking, wealth management, asset management, and he joined the Cardano Foundation in 2020 to drive the foundation's adoption strategy. And I'm particularly interested to explore Cardano's leadership in revolutionizing legacy sectors like wine and art. They are fraught with the same type of siloed gatekeepers and often opaque practices that were of concern when Bitcoin first came onto the scene to democratize and to decentralize the siloed centralization of gatekeepers. So we will talk about all of that and more in a moment. But first, Frederik, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, let's dive in. So let's start with how the Cardano Foundation is leveraging the technology, blockchain specifically, to revolutionize traditional sectors, specifically wine. I am an enophile, so you had me at wine, but also art, two of those kind of siloed areas that certainly I think could benefit from the type of leadership that you are showing through the Cardano Foundation.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think one of the tenets or one of the things that's really important for us in the Cardano Foundation is to explore the art of the possible. I think a lot of people through the last sort of 10 years have some really good ideas about how blockchain can benefit capital markets and how blockchain can start maybe banking some of the more unbanked. There's still some questions about digital identities and other things. So what we really are looking at is saying, how can we explore things which has not been done on a blockchain before? And how can we do it in such a way that you can actually go on a blockchain explorer and you can find these things. So you can, blockchain, we always say trust but verify. So how can you verify that what I'm saying on this podcast is correct without necessarily being able to read the code? That's very important for us. The other thing which is very important is that, if you want to be a judge of yourself, that's really hard. You need to put up some kind of a standard. And there's a lot of things you could choose from. What we did is we chose the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 goals. And we said, when we do a partnership or we try to show something, why don't we pick something where we can tick a few boxes from these 17 goals? Because in this way, we're not just, enabling one person or one company or one fraction of the world to become better, stronger, leaner, to do something, but we're also doing something which we believe has a greater chance of changing social and financial systems to the better. So this is all about driving equitable growth and ensuring that we come together as humanity. So with that sort of framing the discussion, what we do is we develop partnerships with enterprises, some international institutions, government agencies, and NGOs to really try and showcase, as I said, the vast range of what's actually possible on a blockchain, a third generation blockchain, because there's a very big difference between blockchains, and focus also on sectors who's not been so impacted by the blockchain revolution as they are today. So a couple of those things could, for instance, be, legacy systems, transform traditional business models, operating models, revolutionizing fundraising models in philanthropy, supporting the authentication of goods. For instance, using NFTs, not just as sort of like JPEG store or that kind of thing, but really looking at it as that NFTs has a unique ability to bridge also into supply chains and be used as access tokens or access credentials or even some kind of identities. And so forth. So as you were touching on with wine, one of the things we've done is that we've done a strategic collaboration with the country of Georgia. And Georgia is quite special. I didn't know this either when I sort of entered into these discussions, but wine seems to be actually invented in Georgia. And Georgia was, of course, a part of the Soviet Union. And that meant that when, Kotler's marketing atlas came on, and, you know that from academia, right? It's one of the most famous marketing books. Well, Georgia was not allowed to use that because they could only sell the wine in the Soviet Union. So that meant that when Spain and Italy and California and others were not only producing amazing wine, but they had the ability to really build strong brands and recognition and marketing at scale around that. And Georgia couldn't do that. So in Georgia, wine is actually a part of the country's nationality. Nearly every family has their own sort of family recipe on wine, and they're extremely proud of this. And what we really liked was this idea that you had the ability to showcase a country who'd been sort of blocked out of the world systems. And secondly, that we had some heritage here, right? So we were working with something which was, thousands of years old. And they are so proud of it that they actually have, under the agricultural government, they actually have a wine ministry. And they have over 30 quality processors who need to be signed off by this ministry before wine can be exported. So if wine is for the local population, it's basically family recipe and secrets and so on. But if it's exported, it's over 30 processes. And they're using AI and machine learning and picture recognition and so on to basically prove that those processes are good. And that leads very well nicely into a blockchain which has the ability to use very strong metadata, has the ability to use different identification models, and so forth. So that's we thought it was sort of a match made in heaven that we could actually show supply chain, authentication, and other things. Now, unfortunately, wine is a physical product. Blockchain is a digital product. And the biggest issue we always have is when you're going to merge digital with physical. So very often when you do that, you need a adjacent or secondary technology. And in this case, we chose to work with a Swiss company called ScanTrust, something like a high definition QR code. And this high definition QR code is so that if you take the sticker off the wine bottle, or if you just polish it, well, it won't work anymore. It's extremely sensitive. You can also not take a high definition camera, take a picture of it and print it. It loses a few pixels and those pixels are sufficient. Now, is that the best technology? Well, maybe, right? There's different problems you're trying to solve. There's also something about, is it the right wine which is in the bottle? And the QR code is not necessarily the right way to do it. But for this, it was a very cheap and very secure way to basically ensure that we could add identity and add every single bottle on the blockchain.
Mm-hmm. Provenance is so important. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we did that with a small vineyard as a test case. A couple of thousand bottles. It's actually a female vineyard, so it's very interesting. So it's a female entrepreneur who runs it. And we're now rolling that out to 100,000 bottles across something called Bolnissi. I'm probably pronouncing it a little bit wrong, which is an area in Georgia. And the hope is we will have 100,000 bottles from different wineries with digital signature from this quality process. So basically the state is signing off. And then you will also see when it leaves the country, and you can see where it's imported to as well. So you can actually also track the bottle. Now, there's not a GPS tracker in it. So what's interesting here is, of course, when you import and export things, there's some paperwork which is done.
Right.
So when I take my bottle of wine here, I can see it's imported in Switzerland, which is extremely important actually, because you can then start not just thinking about the provenance, but you can also start thinking about the footprint. And then obviously the next thing you sort of want to try and do is start thinking about, carbon footprint and other things as it goes through the whole supply chain. So this is like one of the use cases around wine, which I'm particularly proud of, because it has, it ticks a lot of boxes, and it really shows what's actually possible. And to my big surprise, all the things I just spoke about now was actually not what made it so interesting. What made it really interesting for the vineyard was that they suddenly were able to track that they were selling wines in areas of the world which they never sold wine before.
Right,
So
right.
what you actually, all the things I'm talking about is sort of very academic and so I'm solving problems, in the engine room and so on. But what that got them really excited was they could suddenly see that there was really a lot of wine which was sold in places they did no marketing, they had no presence or anything like that. And that started to get them very excited because of the ERP data, right? That they suddenly were able to not only use the blockchain as a platform for distribution, but they were able to track that. And it appeals for a new class of customers, which I like to think about as blockchain citizens.
Say more about that.
So what I think about when I talk about blockchain citizens is that we noticed specifically around Cardano, but I think also a couple of other platforms. Algorand is quite strong in this. Polkadot is quite strong in that. We see that it attracts not just younger people, but attracts people who is very much aware that everything who's on the internet has a quite high likelihood of being fake or being manipulated or other things. And on a blockchain, because the whole nature of a blockchain is that it costs something, it means that it gets more expensive to do something fake, but it also means that you can verify things through the blockchain, and you can have different signatures, digital identifiers, and so on. So what we are seeing is that there's not just on blockchain, but specifically around blockchains and other technology, there's a new sort of consumer class emerging, which actually are willing to pay more if they can understand the footprint they're leaving on Mother Earth when they consume and when they buy. They are also willing to learn about how they can verify things themselves, because they stop trusting institutions and brands, because they're like, who actually put the sticker on that apple? Who said that this is now, sustainable, harvested, and no biochemical treatments has been done? And how do I know that is not just somebody, like a teenager in the back room who just got the order to mark some other apples, right?
Absolutely.
And this population is still quite small, but it's really seeing an exponential growth. And we can sort of track that across different blockchain platforms, which is very interesting.
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
So this is really fascinating, and there's so much there. So let me circle back to a few things to make sure that folks are really understanding and appreciating how there are so many other uses for a decentralized method of verifying transactional information. Obviously, the first use case has been for digital assets. But this idea of the supply chain is an important one. It's one where you have dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of people who are relying upon each other to do their part to get something from farm literally to table, for example, and things that travel around the world, lending itself to the fact that we truly are global citizens and having a system that reflects that. So you don't have to know each other. You don't have to speak the same language. You don't have to operate in the same currency, although we hope that you do someday. Someday there will be a global reserve. Well, that's a story for another day, a different global reserve. But for now, we have to rely on each other more perhaps than at any other time in the world, given how interconnected we are, certainly with each other as a matter of business and also to the environment. So the idea of moving something that part of its value is also in the story of its origin, and how important that is in the wine industry in particular. And you mentioned that it's not perfect, but it's moving toward that level, thinking of how imperfect it is to rely on one person or a few people to give the thumbs up. And oftentimes people take that very seriously. So I'm not diminishing the origin and the terroir of a particular area or only getting champagne from the region of Champagne and et cetera, but you're giving this really great use case out of Georgia, probably an unlikely wine area for most people to now know that they have the option of even receiving wine from that area and knowing for sure that that's where it comes from. The other side, which is interesting that I hadn't thought of, is the benefit to the producers as well, to not only know that they're moving bottle from point A to point Z, but also being able to track those different places and spaces in real time, not relying on some intermediary to report back in, but to know that I don't have to trust you or know you. I can trust the veracity of the information in real time. I think that for things where it really matters, wine, art, diamonds, things of that nature, it really starts to move the needle there in an important way. And so I don't want people to miss that. So people are so focused, and understandably so. It's the attention grabber when we think of the disintermediation and the disruption in the financial sectors. It's a great use case. I don't think it's going to be the best, because there's so many other things that can be done with the technology and your work focusing on. And I want you to say more about this as well, this idea of sustainability and accessibility being inextricably linked with what you first presented.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, it's always hard with these interviews because you don't exactly know all the listeners and what level they're on. But I think one thing which I really want to point out is that Bitcoin did something truly amazing. It allowed us to move value, not information, but move value from A to B without an intermediary. It's like mind-blowing when you kind of think about it. When you're in the engine room of public infrastructure or even some private infrastructure, this is amazing, right? It's a complete new way of rethinking the internet. Now, Ethereum, what it really did is it allowed us to replicate the power of Wall Street, specifically how assets are being collected and distributed. So we have some very fancy names for it in investment banking, but what it really is that the banks control where asset flows based on they have to control to their clients. Now, the third generation blockchains, what they really do is they open up all of that, because now for the first time, you don't have one type of identity. You have multiple type of identity, where there's a very lean identity, meaning that is like a robot who's identifying it on the conveyor belt, all the way to sort of like a fully fledged AML, KYC, passport kind of thing. So you have a whole range of different identities. The second part is you have multiple types of asset representation. So in the third generation blockchains like Cardano, when we talk about assets, asset is a type of data. It's actually not just like a representation of a fiat currency. And that means that suddenly the power of that representation can be everything from intellectual property right to physical wine to an Indonesian fisherman to multiple types of data who holds value in different ecosystems and under different regulatory regimes.
Right.
Now, this is extremely important because for what we have is we have the ability to use either smart contracts to create an asset or use something called native assets. Native assets means that you don't have to do a smart contract to do an asset representation on the Cardano blockchain. So this is a complete sort of mind shift or engineering shift in how you do that. And last but not least, we think a lot about the story of the transaction. So in the banking world, we have the SWIFT system, and the SWIFT system basically has some different standards where we are talking about, my name is Frederik Gregaard, I live in Switzerland, and so on. But when I'm moving, or I'm asking my bank to move assets from one bank to another bank, right? I actually have a double last name, right? Not that many people know that, right? And that means that the bank number 2 might have that, but bank number 1 doesn't have that. The SWIFT message is the messaging protocol, but the assets are moved in another system. That means that 2 back office systems need to talk together. This won't match, which means that 2 humans need to connect across back office or different banks, and they have banking secrecy and corporate secrecy, and they're not allowed to talk fully open and so on, right? So it slows down everything. And what we can do really on the Cardano blockchain is we can merge all of that together, which means that you have the ability to put metadata into the actual transaction, which is inseparable. You cannot remove it. But you also have the ability to put metadata into it, which is changeable. That is, for instance, what we did with Veritree. So Veritree is a reforestation project we did in Kenya, where we set forward to say, okay, how can we use NFTs in a different way, in a sustainable way, but also in a way where we create something good for Mother Earth, really, right? So we set forward to plant 1 million trees, and every single tree, we wanted that to be on the blockchain. Because if it's on the blockchain, there is a part which you don't want to change, right? So you want to, like a non-fungible token, as your listeners probably know, you want to lock that information in so it's inseparable, like what I spoke about in banking, which unfortunately is not the case there, right? And the other part is that you want to ensure that you have an adjacent technology, right? So you want to have sensors in the earth, measuring the pH value. You want to have wind sensors who's measuring how much wind is coming in. You want to, have air sensors measuring, the air quality and so on. Because what you really want to do is you want to make sure that tree exists, right? You want to make sure how much is that tree growing, because there's a difference if you're in the side of the forest, if you're in the right place of the forest and stuff like that. So the trees will grow in different shapes and forms based on multiple things. There's some beautiful books around how trees also communicate with each other and so on, right? But that basically means that you actually now have the ability to verify your carbon credit and verify the size of that credit, right? Because then you suddenly can be the owner of some trees, which is actually standing in a better place than others. Now this, you want to ensure that actually is being uploaded. In this case, it's being uploaded on a monthly and a quarterly basis to the blockchain, right? But it allows you as the owner of the tree, not just to feel good that you have a certificate that you own a tree. Now you have geo-tracking on that tree. You have persons with a cell phone coming by, taking pictures and verifying the tree is there. And you have Internet of Things sensors, which is connected, which actually talks to you about the size and the growth of the tree, which you can then turn into a carbon credit. So this is suddenly using NFTs in a complete different way and thinking about not just the regulatory information, but also all this changeable metadata. And this is very unique with third generation blockchain, and specifically Cardano, that you had the availability to use so heavy metadata loads in there. And that allows you then to go in on a public blockchain's explorer and find your tree, but also find the information about it. Right. And you can see that it changes, right? Which is, I think, is really exciting.
If you're an engineer or a scientist, you love Formula One, you love cycling, you love learning about how new technologies are changing the world around us, then I thought you may want to listen into my new podcast, the Neil Ashton Podcast. We talk to leading engineers and scientists from around the world, hear about their life stories, hear about new technologies, and hopefully educate you and give you a better sense of how key things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, supercomputing are changing the world around us. If that sounds like it's something you might like, you should come and have a listen.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tonya M. Evans, author of Digital Money Demystified. And I want to let you know that to stay on the leading edge of any opportunity, especially investing, you have to empower yourself with the tools and resources needed to keep your knowledge and skills current. And if you're relying on last year's information or even last month's, look, you're already behind. Sure, you can try to figure this out on your own at YouTube University. The problem is, it's difficult to separate fact from fiction with so many carnival barkers banking on your inexperience. And of course, there are the naysayers, usually from legacy finance, banking on your fear, while they quietly help their high net worth clients to invest. All of it muddies the waters when all you want to know is how to get in safely, legally, and confidently so you're not left behind. That's why I wrote Digital Money Demystified, where I take the top 10 crypto myths head on and give you well-researched, well-supported facts to empower you to make good choices out there in the new digital cash economy. As a law professor who developed the first blockchain crypto and law online certificate program, a retail and corporate crypto policy and education trainer, and a thought leader appearing regularly on national media, I've done the heavy lifting so you don't have to. Look, there are plenty of books and courses on which crypto assets to invest in. Digital Money Demystified is the book you read before you dive into those. So head to digitalmoneydemystified.com to learn more and prepare for the future of money and wealth today. Right. It brings in so many possibilities because at the end of this, when we're thinking about gathering, securing, and disseminating information that can be verified, you have both the asset itself and this inextricable link of a particular asset that is recorded on the blockchain. You also have essentially oracles that are informing in real time to continue to capture data as this asset changes over time, which makes it really, really, our existing or legacy systems just weren't developed to do that. Certainly not well and certainly not in real time, which caused us to have to rely on certain intermediaries for that type of information, which continue to make data and information so incredibly valuable, particularly in this data-driven economy. So it opens up so many possibilities that folks really haven't thought of in general, those who are coming on to adopt the technology now, kick the tires on the financial side. But really what you're highlighting are all the other things from all of the other industries and sectors. You're giving a few noted examples, but also what I also hear in your origin story, and certainly that work of Cardano on the humanitarian side as well. It opens up so many possibilities from an environmental and humanitarian point of view. Talk a bit more about that from humanitarian efforts that align nicely with the work that you're doing and the way that you are leveraging the technology.
Yeah, so this is hard, right? But Cardano was created with the purpose of allowing the growth nations or the small and medium income nations to have access to the same level of technology as the more Western nations have. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, ensuring that the Western nations can upgrade their technology to have access to this new population. Right? And that means that when you're designing a blockchain, a decentralized and distributed system, where you want everybody to be able to have access to it, I wouldn't say it's mission impossible, right? But it's really hard, right? Because what you want to do is you want to get to a place that's somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, where somebody has a cell phone and they suddenly get access to the Cardano Foundation's new educational program, right? And they start learning about blockchain, not like I'm selling, YouTube clips and all of that, but they're learning about what we're speaking about right here, third generation blockchain, right? We just published a 7-hour series on that, and it's going to be even larger. And we're giving it away for free to universities and other blockchains. We're giving it away to competing blockchains so they can put their logo on it, so they can teach their people about how to use the blockchain even better, on their ecosystem. Because what we're thinking about is, if we can get the villager in sub-Saharan Africa to start being able not to rely on what's in his vicinity, but he can actually get access to a global economy, whether he becomes a stake pool operator or whether he translates the educational content and does an app in the local language or whatever he does. Normally, a lot of those people were sort of dependent on what was in walking distance of them in terms of natural resources, in terms of schooling, in terms of businesses, industry, etc. But what we're really trying to say is there a way we can leverage technology in such a way that we are not cutting them away? And I think that's what we mean when we also talk about we are an open and permissionless blockchain. A lot of other sort of blockchains, they say, oh yeah, we are here for everybody, but you need to have X amount of assets to get access, or you need to have this amount of computing power and so on. And as Cardano grows, I also have to say, yes, you can run this on a Stone Pi, you can run it on a Raspberry Pi and so on, right? But I mean, as we see more and more adoption is coming, it's, we are fighting a little bit of an uphill battle as adoption is coming. You want speed, you want more features and all of that. And on the other way, you also want to ensure that you are not crashing the digital gap there is in some society and so on, right? But what's really important for us, and that's also why we align ourselves to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is we really think this has the ability to change the world to the better. We really think that 7-8 billion people can align using this kind of technology in a much better way than what we see on the internet today, where there is such a big incentive in disparity and in separating people and, locking them into a specific view of thought, right? And I think that's the notion and that's the belief of Cardano, that we have here a technology which can enable us to do things in a better way. And we are extremely concerned, for instance, in what we see with the large language models who's coming up now. Because the large language models, what it's really done is it made AI, but a specific part of AI, very accessible. But it also made it extremely hard to figure out if it's the truth.
Right.
Because when you put something into a large language model, what you get back is really well argumented. This is the truth.
Right.
But it might not be the truth, because what the truth is for the large language model is really based on the data set. And if you have enough people on the internet who says that something is the truth because that's what's selling clicks and so on, then the large language model will say that is the truth. And now it becomes extremely hard for you as a consumer or of data to figure that out.
Right.
And that's why we're also working with Stephen Wolfram and so on around computable truth, because we are saying, the blockchain can actually be used to put a line in the sand where you can still get the benefits and of the accessibility of these models, but you can use blockchain as a middle layer to ensure that we are not sort of educating the population in a wrong direction based on them not being able. And I'm not saying it in a bad way. For me, it's really hard when I put something into a large language model to say, okay, is that really the truth? And how do I verify that?
Right.
But the thing with the blockchain is that you have verifiable data and you have computable data. So I really have a hope that we will end up in a situation where we are having the ability to get this kind of access to everybody, but we have it in a computable manner, which means that we now have an ability to actually figure out what is the truth. And that's coming back to the oracles you're speaking about, that we can put different levels of trust in that. So if you think about, let's say, green bonds, for instance, and the issuance and tracking of green bonds, right? This is a classical example, right? There's a lot of greenwashing going on here, and there's a lot of sort of things, right? So, we want to attract investors to climate and environmental projects, right? And I think the blockchain is actually a fantastic place to do that. Because if you have a private centralized database who kind of evaluates the green bond, but you won't be able to get access to the core data either because it costs too much, or, you don't want to give it away because it's your intellectual property, right? And your rating model and so on, right? It's really hard to verify those things. But there's something beautiful happening when you give that data out to the general population. In Cardano, we have 3-4 million people every day interacting with Cardano. And I tell you, there's some really good professors and really good hobby scientists who love to grind that data. And suddenly they start asking the right questions, right? These uncomfortable questions. They're saying, you said this, but I have seen this in the data. How do you compute that, right? And I think in this way, what we can do is we can actually turn the world into an oracle. We can turn 7 billion brains into the oracle of the new world. In a strange way, what we can do is we can go back to the old Greeks and start thinking about philosophy and start thinking about the mantra of an argument. And then you can teach people actually to call out, what is right and wrong based on verifiable blockchain and still get the benefits of AI. But you do that now on a proof of stake blockchain, which uses less energy and is very good for the planet, really, right? And now you're starting to create clunks and societies. You're creating groups of people who is like-minded and can verify those things. And in this way, you're sort of creating business models and you're creating jobs on the blockchain where you don't necessarily have to be in New York or you have to be in Zurich, right? But you can actually sit wherever there is a Starlink connection or an internet connection and you can use your brain power and as much as you can absorb, and you can still take care of your family and your local community. Yeah. And I think this is very interesting.
Absolutely. What you're speaking to is also, I feel like there's this seismic shift from a purely and deeply competitive model to something that's more collaborative, where more people can be involved and more people can win right where they are. I hear in what you're saying a sense of some of the autonomy and some of the other things that people speak of as a matter of finances and decentralized finance, but also in many different ways that people are only just beginning to imagine. I'm wondering if you can leave folks with some takeaways and ways that you are thinking about how Cardano will be integrated in other technologies, and just what's your vision of the role that Cardano's blockchain will play in the intersection of technology and even more diverse sectors in the next 5 years?
So I have a very strong belief that there's only going to be two companies in the world going forward. And we can be very wide in our definition of companies. That can easily also be a digital autonomous organization or stuff like that. But there's only going to be two types of companies. There's going to be blockchain-enabled companies and not blockchain-enabled companies. And I think that blockchain-enabled companies will win every single time. The reason why I believe that is because I really truly believe in humanity. And I believe that we actually want the best for each other. And when we can change the operating model to a place where everything has a price and you can verify those things, I think that blockchain will go into the background like a foundational technology, which we take the benefit of, but we don't necessarily, not all of us will be working with that and be experts in it. We'll be working what we think about as the value capture layer. We'll be working, in farming or in engineering or whatever that is. But the foundation of that will be on a blockchain, because that allows us to combat this notion that we actually have to admit very often that we just don't know, and we have to blindly trust in some people, where we sometimes now are saying, is that really the people who is representing my view? Is that really the people which I can trust when I take my diabetes medicine? That I know that is what is in it, Right. Is that really what I'm going to give my newborn, So when we we saw what COVID really did was we saw that when things start becoming serious, and we start really thinking about the lives and death of communities and cities, the trust we've built up is not as strong as we would have liked it to be. And I think that blockchain is a technology which will enable us to not just bring trust back into society, but also bring much more brains and much more diversity and swarm thinking, but also a meaning with contributing to community in it. Because I think we as humans, we are not meant to just sit back in virtual reality and receive some money and then, everything is good. We're in our DNA, and our DNA doesn't change that fast. We are meant to contribute to our little class of people or our little community, right? And if we don't find that meaning with it, I think, unfortunately, what we're going to see is a dissatisfaction, which probably drugs cannot help us out of. But the good thing is that education and meaning and contribution can.
So beautifully said. I'm excited. I'm ready to just run out and tell the world. Fred Gregaard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Please let people know where they can learn more about you and certainly the Cardano Foundation and all the great work you're doing.
Well, I think if you have the opportunity, we will, in the start of November, have what we call the Cardano Summit in Dubai. We do it in a new place every year, right? And what we do is we bring a couple of thousand people together. You don't have to be a blockchain aficionado, but we bring them together in one location where you can shake hands and you can meet innovators, you can learn about blockchain, you can learn about industries, and really, see what's going on in the engine room, both in terms of the layer one solution, in terms of the integration layer, but also in terms of the applications on top of. Now, if you cannot get to Dubai, we're actually doing this in, I think it's about 30 locations around the world. So there will be local gatherings in the start of November all around the world. And you can go in on CardanoFoundation.org and find out exactly where your closest are. Because I think learning about it on the internet is okay, but coming together with people who's knowledgeable and passionate about it is the best way to really touch this technology. So I think this is a really good way. The other website I would like to highlight is Cardano.org. On Cardano.org, we have a great developer portal, and we have great descriptions of many of the different, not just sustainable projects, but also applications, wallets, and so forth. And there is some really good access also there to community resources, Discord channels, Telegram channels, and so on, where you can ask questions, get answers, get inspiration, maybe even put your own project together.
Really powerful. As you were speaking, I have an online academy but we do some in-person events now as well, Advantage Evans Academy. And I'm always refreshing the information. One of the courses is From Cash to Crypto and how to successfully, simply, and safely onboard, and constantly updating my information to make sure that folks have the best in class. I feel like there's a lot of synergy there. So I'll be following up with you personally and professionally to make sure that we're in shared spaces again to join, because the future is bright as long as folks have a solid foundation of education. So they're out there making good choices and they can separate all of the carnival barkers from the folks doing great work like you. So I appreciate that you spent this time with us. We will drop all of those links and information in the show notes. Fred, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's the first. Remember what I said at the beginning, not the last. We have a lot of work to do, but it sounds like you're doing a lot of great work. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tech Intersect podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you love it, please tell the world. If not, go ahead and tell me. And in either case, drop a comment or ping me on social media at IPProfEvans with the hashtag Tech Intersect. And finally, a quick reminder on digital safety. There are a lot of scammers out there impersonating me and others, and I need your help. Now hear this, and remember, I will never slide into your DMs to say peace and blessings or hey, and I will never reach out to solicit your time or your money on social media like ever. I'm not a trader. I am an educator and an attorney licensed in 4 states. Thank you very much. I'm here to inform, inspire, and empower. No cap, and definitely no Forex. So be careful, make good choices, and remember, I developed an entire free masterclass about the topic of digital safety in the crypto space. So check out secureyourcryptobag.com for more information. That's secureyourcryptobag.com. All right, that's all for this episode. Until next time, continue to shine.